What if the rise and fall of the world's greatest empires wasn't random at all? What if there was a predictable, repeatable pattern behind all of it? Well, legendary investor Ray Dalio spent years digging through 500 years of history to find exactly that. He calls it the changing world order, and honestly, understanding it might just be the key to navigating the next few decades.
Okay, so to get our heads around this, we have to start with the one question that really frames Dalio's entire theory. Throughout all of history, what's been the real driver? What has decided the fate of nations? Is it having mountains of cash, or is it having absolute power?
And Dalio's answer? It's pretty direct. He says there are two sides of the same coin. See, power lets you control resources and create wealth. And then, that wealth can be used to buy influence, to build armies, and to secure even more power. It's this powerful feedback loop that has basically shaped all of human history. So, how has this dynamic between money and power actually played out over the centuries? Well, what counts as wealth and power has definitely changed, but the relationship between them, that's been rock solid. Think about it. Before the 1700s, it was super simple. Power was land. And who had the land? Royalty and the church. But then, the Industrial Revolution came along and flipped the whole script. Suddenly, power shifted to the people who owned the new productive assets. We're talking factories, technology, and the capital. These were the things that could generate wealth on a scale nobody had ever seen before.
Now, this massive historical shift is actually just one part of a much bigger and scarily predictable pattern. What Dalio discovered is that empires, a lot like people, have a life cycle. They're born, they grow up, they peak, and eventually they decline. He calls this whole thing the big cycle.
And the thing about the big cycle is it's not random. It usually kicks off right after a huge war ends. The winner basically gets to write the new rules for the entire world. This starts a new world order, which then leads to peace and prosperity until, inevitably, it leads to another big conflict. And then the cycle just starts all over again. So right after a war, you get this period of peaceful rebuilding. A ton of innovation. Think about the boom after World War II. But here's the catch. Success leads to complacency and excess. The empire at the top takes on way too much debt. The gap between the rich and the poor gets massive, and society starts to get a little soft. That's the peak. And from there, it's a downhill slide into decline, losing that competitive edge and facing huge conflicts, both at home and with rivals abroad. Now, you might be thinking this all sounds a bit vague, right? But remember, Dalio's an investor. He doesn't do vague. He lives and breathes data. So he actually developed a system to measure exactly where a country is in its life cycle. He built this incredible dashboard that tracks 18 key metrics. He calls them indicators. You can think of them like the vital signs of a nation's health. It measures everything: debt levels, trade balances, technological innovation, the quality of education, and, of course, military strength. By tracking all this data over time, he can literally diagnose the health of an empire. Okay, so what does this data-driven dashboard tell us about the world's two biggest powers right now? Let's take Dalio's framework and apply it to the United States and China. Well, when you look at the financial indicators, the U.S. is showing some classic signs of a late-stage empire. We're talking massive debt, printing tons of money, and facing these really tough economic choices. On the other hand, you've got China, which has become the world's biggest trading nation, putting it in a much, much stronger financial position. And if we look inside each country, the story is just as stark. The U.S. is dealing with extreme political polarization that makes it incredibly hard to solve big problems. Dalio sees this as a huge red flag for decline. Meanwhile, China's centralized top-down system means way less internal bickering, which lets them execute these huge, ambitious plans really efficiently. And what about the long game, the race for human talent? The trends here are pretty telling. While the U.S. still has the absolute best elite universities in the world, the scores for general public education have been slipping. China, though, they are pouring resources into improving education for their entire population, creating this massive pool of skilled talent for the future. But, and this is a really crucial but, despite all these warning signs, Dalio's data shows the U.S. still holds a huge advantage in key technologies, something like an 8-to-1 advantage over China. So yeah, this race is far from over. Now, here's where it gets really serious. Dalio argues that this conflict between the declining power and the rising power, it isn't some far-off possibility. It is happening right now, and it's being fought on 5 different fronts: a trade war, a technology war, a geopolitical war for influence, a capital war for control of money, and finally, the one everyone's worried about, the risk of a military war. So, if this giant historical cycle is playing out right in front of us, what does that actually mean for you and me? How can we use Dalio's principles to get through this crazy period of change in our own lives? The main reason this cycle keeps repeating, Dalio says, is because while technology changes, human nature doesn't. Think about it. Generations that live through a devastating war will do almost anything to avoid another one. But their kids and grandkids, they only know peace and prosperity. They forget the pain. And so they become more willing to risk it all in a fight, which just restarts the cycle all over again. In the face of all this uncertainty, Dalio gives us a process, a timeless framework that works just as well for a person as it does for an empire. First, have clear goals. What do you really want? Second, face the problems that are standing in your way head on. Third, diagnose those problems to find the real root cause. Don't just put a Band-Aid on it. Fourth, design a solid plan to get around them. And finally, number 5, the step where most people give up, you have to execute. You have to push through and actually do the work to get the result. And that brings us to the final massive question. We've seen this exact pattern play out before, with the Dutch, with the British, and now we're watching it happen again. For 500 years, this big cycle has repeated itself. So as we watch the world order change right before our eyes, we all have to ask ourselves, is this time really going to be any different?